So the next thing that we wanted to see is what happens with the distraction. And what we find there is that there's benefits for both types of distraction. There's not a greater benefit when it's more distracting. It's any type of distraction is benefited. And this is just showing you the same thing, that in the high number of faces condition, remember too, the red line, which is after training, is higher than the black line. When the task is easy, we don't see much difference. So it seems to be the case that both the ability to maintain the information is improved and the protection against distraction is improved.
So this may be, I mean, he's also saying that if he may, one suggestion he would like to make, or at least like to see, is that among those who receive trainings, there will be individual differences. And if you look at the Buddhist understanding of the qualities of a meditative mental state, we talk about, for example, in the Indian tradition, say, for example, in relation to single-pointedness cultivation or shamatha, two main qualities that are being cultivated are stability on the one side, focused, sustained focus and stability, and then the vividness and the clarity on the other. So, and they correlate to the two main obstacles. One is mental excitation, which comes in the way of maintaining the stability, and one is mental laxity, which impedes the cultivation of the vividness, maintenance of the vividness. So, again, of course, we need to bear in mind that when we talk about these obstacles, there are different levels. You can have a coarse level of these obstacles, subtle and very subtle levels of these obstacles. So imagine among the individuals who receive this training, due to whatever differences, some individuals may have much greater capacity for maintaining the stability, yet has less alertness and vividness. And then some individuals may not have this greater capacity for stability, but at the same time they have this very alert, kind of acute, kind of vivid quality. So is there a way of teasing that out in your experiments? So so within these people who receive training, His Holiness would hypothesize that those, although may have good stability but have less vividness and clarity, they might not be able to perform well when there are two phases, multiple phases. And those who, instead of greater stability but has greater vividness and alert mind, they might be able to perform better when there are complexities thrown in. So, as you do this experiment, one suggestion would be that you can be a bit more kind of discriminating. You can be a bit more discriminating and try to see among the trained subjects, people who have received training, to see whether someone hasn't paid that much attention to the cultivation of vividness as opposed to stability. And that, of course, you have to base to some extent on the self-report by asking questions. And then once you have a sense of these differences, then you might want to expose them to the experiments.
I think that that level of precision would be fantastic, and this is where maybe we're talking about the real differences between novices and experienced practitioners. The strategy that I was considering to answer a question like that wouldn't be so much to look at individual differences in the context of these new and very novice practitioners, because it would be difficult for them to tell the difference.
It's I think Solon says it's possible, even in the context of someone receiving 8 weeks of training. I mean, when you start meditating, you can kind of experientially, to some extent, distinguish between a form of stability that has, laxity, and form of stability that is, freer from, laxity.
So
let alone 8 weeks, His Holiness is saying that in his case, he doesn't even have 1 day training in this kind of mindfulness. However, if he starts observing the mind, he can see the
even if it's
distinction.
few minutes, few seconds.
So you can distinguish between excitation and laxity to start with. So as the experimenter, you need to first of all have to be able to understand the differences between these two obstacles, excitation and laxity, so that you have a better appreciation of the concepts. And then based on that, you can start developing self-report questions to find out whether someone is more prone to excitation or more prone to laxity. And then on that basis, then you can do the experiments.
Right. I'd like to just comment on that. There's no doubt that I need to learn more about the practices. So, but one strategy that we've taken is to have other experiments that really tap into this ability to sustain your attention, which would, I think, be better able to index, may allow us a different window onto which subjects are good at stability versus those that may not be.
So His Holiness would hypothesize that when you bring these subjects to experiments, whether you perform the same experiments when they were hungry and when they were full, he would expect there will be differences in the performance. Because when you are full, there's a greater proneness to laxity, mental laxity.
We've actually done that experiment.
And also whether you do it in the morning or in the evening.
Yeah.
So you did that?
Yeah, we did that with. We actually gave them an experiment that was like the flanker experiment. We had words, and they had to detect the color of the words. The words were food words, and they were either very tasty, high-calorie foods or not at all. And we gave them the task, and everybody showed that they were slower at detecting the color when the foods were high-calorie versus low-calorie.
That could be true. If, for example, in the meditation, in the Buddhist text, it says that when you take an object of your meditation, which is kind of solid and heavy, that can help maintain a greater stability.
The more light So,
for example, if you have an object that is light, and also light in the kind of a texture sense, then also in the brilliant sense, that can reduce proneness to mental laxity. That's quite interesting. Am I right in understanding that what they have to do is to detect the color?
Yes.
But the words describing the food are very greasy, heavy food versus just ordinary other food.
Cake or carrot.
Any pleasure daily casual, vegetarian, non-vegetarian casual.
So His Holiness was saying there might be also slightly different differences between people who are vegetarian versus non-vegetarian.
I think generally vegetarian better.
More alert, more alert. Same sage yagaruje.
패지 누구 양을 쳐거다. 누구 지양 쳐도.
So it's partly a function of the lightness of the body. You feel in the body. So vegetarians generally make you feel lighter.
그래. 특히 vegetarian 저가지 저거 배 루데도 좋아요.
But however, there are some vegetarians whose belly is already bulging.
Oh yes.
Just to finish up with the food experiment, I know that takes us off track, but I just wanted to mention that the slowness of the high-calorie food decreased after we fed them. And after 8 weeks of training, when they came in, they had a reduction. So it's consistent with the idea. But my bigger point is just that I absolutely agree that there's more ways in which we can tap into these two features. In addition to the methods that you described of probing the subject's own state and awareness of their laxity and stability, we might think about designing training that emphasizes only one aspect or another to see if we can see specific differences in our pattern of results. It's another strategy.
His Holiness was saying that he has read in one of the texts that contrasting the shamatha practice in the context of sutra kind of mainstream
general.
Buddhism versus in the Vajrayana context when one is cultivating this visualization. The text says that in the general context of shamatha, then the cultivation of the vividness in relation to a single chosen object is okay. So that's the goal. Whereas in the Vajrayana context of visualization, then the vividness has to be applied to the object from all sorts of different angles, from a multiplicity of angles. So His Holiness has often wondered why that is the case. So today he feels that some light has been shed on this.
So thank you.
So the last thing I'd like to share with you, Your Holiness, is a study that we've been doing in older adults. And the question that we asked is, well, we had two questions. Does working memory get worse or degrade with age? Now, Adele showed us these beautiful images this morning of the frontal lobes developing through the course of child development, and that they don't fully develop till we're in about our mid-20s. Well, the bad news is that they're also the first to start degrading as we age. And so we would predict, and many have shown, that it is the case that our working memory performance gets worse as we get older. The question I had was, if we know this is happening, is there a way in which mindfulness training, which seems to have these beneficial effects in young adults, might actually be protective in older adults? And if so, we would expect that perhaps with practice, the rate of decay or decline in older adults might be reduced. So the first question was just, if we compare the younger and older subjects on this exact experiment, do we get the effects that people have previously found, which is worse performance? And that's what I'm showing here. The dotted line is younger adults, and the red line is older adults. And what we see is that their biggest difficulty is when they have to maintain more information in the presence of more distraction. So it's not that they're just worse overall. It's specifically when there's a challenge as you're holding the information. So we have these older and younger adults, and only the older adults receive the training in this case. And we have control subjects who don't receive training that are younger adults or that are older adults. And what I'm showing on the next slide, so the answer is yes. What I'm showing on this slide is a comparison between the older adults who received training, who are again in red, and the older adults matched in age who did not receive training. And what we find is their performance is maintained, whereas the older adults with training improved. And so this positive result, in a way, it's very interesting to think about if it is the case that mindfulness training can be protective against aging. And this last graph is just showing the mindfulness training group, the older adults, compared to younger adults with no training.
So what does the graph suggest?
The red lines are the red
so
line.
The young adults are still better.
The red line is the same here as here. In this case, the dotted line is older adults who received no training, so they're the same age as the people in the red line. Okay, no training. Mm-hmm. Here, it's younger adults who received no training.
They're the dotted line.
And they're the dotted line.
But they're still higher.
The younger adults that receive no training are statistically comparable to the older adults with training. So the question you might ask is, what about the younger adults who receive training? And as I showed you previously, they get even better than this level.
Yes.
So the kind of view what we might have is to think about mindfulness training as being somewhat effective in protecting us in this aging process. And in a sense, these older adults' performance looks younger. So the answer to both questions is yes, that we can improve working memory in older adults. And I just want to end by bringing up this definition that Alan described and that Rupert discussed, to say we might, through this conversation between cognitive neuroscientists studying attention and Buddhist scholars, start getting a handle on what these concepts, how these concepts might map onto each other. Is it the case that Manasikara is something like orienting, turning the mind toward? Is it the case that smriti, without thinking about the ethical and wholesome qualities, may be similar to working memory in the sense that it's about remembering in the short term, calling to mind, taking a hold and not losing the object. So just to bring us back to the conclusions, what I've tried to share with you is some of the studies that we've been doing to explore the relationship between mindfulness training and these aspects of attention that we know a lot about. And so far it seems to be that there are many positive results that we find there are benefits of this type of training, even in folks that are, even in individuals that are learning with very brief training for the first time. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Me?
Yes, if you have some questions, I'm sure you have plenty of questions, but maybe His Holiness has already been adding a lot information from the Buddhist side, and I think that's why I let a little bit of more time, because that was really extremely interesting. Do you have a question that would even bring more?
One of the things that I didn't get to tell you about today, Your Holiness, is another set of studies that we've been doing in which we are investigating these working memory processes and at the same time looking to see how mood or emotional experience might be changing. And what we're finding is that it's not, when we compare groups of people that have all received training, and we look to see how much their improvement in working memory relates to how much time they spent practicing, we find a nice relationship. The more they practiced, the better their working memory got. And these aren't long periods of time. The maximum was something like 12 hours over 8 weeks as the total time. At the same time, we're finding that there are improvements in positive mood and negative mood. And if we statistically try to understand the relationship between working memory and mood, we find that they are related to each other. So it seems to be the case that the greater the capacity, the more reduction in negative mood. So my question to you is, in thinking about these processes of mental control, of attention, are the views that these capacities are used in the service of multiple types of contexts, or is it that there's a different kind of capacity that's brought to emotional experience?
야, 대대기 지 치매게 지게 매체 쳇다랑 심지가 그 혈류리가 즉 잡았어야도 이들 장과 연구로. 내가 말을 들었어요.
So these are kind of, I mean, these are essentially faculties. Once they are developed, they can be applied in many different domains. And to what kind of domain it is applied is very much dependent upon the intention and the motivation of the person. So you could imagine in the Buddhist context, someone whose main aspiration is to seek enlightenment would cultivate these qualities and apply these qualities, directed towards that goal. And then you could also have practitioners, who will cultivate these qualities, but whose main aspiration is to attain more fortunate or favorable rebirth. But then you could also imagine people whose, kind of worldview is, this lifetime, and would want to attain, greater peace of mind and, happier mental states and so on. One can cultivate these qualities and apply these, faculties directed towards that aim. So it's really up to the domain to which the motivation of the individual person leads to. So in the case of shamatha practice, even though the person who is cultivating shamatha may not be motivated to do this towards attainment of liberation and towards overcoming of the afflictions, the kleshas, but as a result of cultivating shamatha and attaining it, it is, the case that it will be the case that there will be a significant reduction in many of the manifest levels of afflictions, like, attachment to the sensual objects and so on. So in Abhidhamma, for example, there's a discussion of the three realms, the desire realm, the form realm, and the formless realm. And corresponding to these different realms, there are also and different afflictions, in afflictions that belong to the desire realm, that is associated with the form realm and formless realms and so on. So, for example, when you attain a single-pointedness of the mind for the practitioner, although within this schema of the three realms, it may belong to the desire realm, but the fact that a high level of single-pointedness has been attained, as a byproduct, there will be a reduction in the arising of more manifest levels of afflictions like attachment to the sensual objects and so on.
Well, I have to follow up with this. I know you don't want me to, but this is something that, Your Holiness, is something that I have been very conflicted about. Because these results that I just described to you come from a group of people that were Marines, soldiers, before they went to Iraq. And I can say a lot about our intention for bringing these practices to them. They're suffering immensely. They're coming back. They've got trauma. They're dealing with contexts that require a great amount of attention so they don't make missteps and cause more harm. And they're coming back very damaged, causing them a lot of harm in terms of domestic violence, community violence. That was the intention with which we brought these practices to them. They did benefit. They improved their working memory, and they reduced their negative affect. Based on what you just said, it seems to me that there's a trust in these practices, assuming they're taught properly, that is corrective, that the qualities that might be developed could lead to greater good. But I wanted to really talk to you about this. I don't think it's a simple issue, and I don't want to derail our discussion, but I'm in the very fortunate position where, in the context of many scientists that might do something that leads them to feeling that their science might be used for good or evil, I'm in a very fortunate position to have my science intersect with your interest. So I'd like to ask you for your advice.
I appreciate your work. That's all.
I may try to offer something. First of all, from what His Holiness was mentioning about the complex visualization, having a different way of treating the obstacles of excitement and laxity, it's very difficult to use excitement on one pointed single object because it's basically a major obstacle. But in the case of complex visualization, there's a possibility of channeling a very active mind because of the complexity of the object itself. So if your mind is very active, you can just make it very busy looking at all the details. Mm-hmm. So in a way, there is a possibility of using that very hyperactive mind to increase and vivid visualization. While laxity is a loser because everything dims and you don't see how you could use it. So now, as an indication of what you were saying, how much...
To clarify the approach of this more complex form of shamatha meditation in the Vajrayana context, it's not a question of shifting attention to different objects within the field of one's focus, but rather maintaining this single-pointedness upon a chosen object, initially a simple object, and then up to a point where, as the text describes, the objects become so real as if you could touch it and feel it. You could see it or touch it. So once you have attained that level of stability and vividness of the object, then you add different features and you build up. So you don't shift the focus, but you just, and while maintaining the earlier object. So somewhat analogous to a painter who paints an eye and then starts filling up the face and the rest of the body. So you maintain your focus on the earlier object, but then you add on to it and then slowly building up into So the aim is that at a certain point you are able to maintain the image of the entire mandala, both the person himself, the meditator, and the environment in which the person has been visualized within a single mental state.
It's
Mathieu, you
about
want to follow up?
the second aspect of the question, how the mindfulness can help well-being and positive moods. And I think there's a clear link in the sense that negative moods come from automatic, unconscious chain reaction. One thought leads to many that invades your mind and create that afflictive emotion. So mindfulness, in the sense that you might be more aware of the coming of these thoughts, and therefore when they are still weak, being able to let them dissolve. There's a clear connection between mindfulness and not falling into the habit of destructive emotions.
So this may be partly relevant or not, but one thing that Solens was saying that he would be interested to hear from the neuroscientist particularly is whether there are any differences in the brain level expressions of someone, say, who's paying attention to a very selective single focus or kind of a more distributed focus, like kind of a global. And you want to take up...
Please.
I think there are some differences. I mean, usually when you're doing a global task, there's more activity on the right side, and when you're doing a focused task, there's more activity on the left. So that's one finding.
다들 잡아요 이너다. 다들 잡아요 이너. 차단 걸로 자꾸 집에 그도래. 레바 망어디 구조적도와 레베 대선 찍는 구조적도.
So given this, there is a difference between more focused versus more distributed, even at the level of brain expression. So when a very strong kind of, destructive emotion like kind of, say, anger or aversion arises.
Or attachment.
Strong, attachment arises.
So usually, according to our experience, of course, everybody have this full experience. So when we develop anger or attachment, then that mind is really focusing one single target. That absolute, independent, that kind of feeling. So therefore, the mindfulness, these things bring more complexity. Yeah. So therefore, by nature, right, single pointed one target, right, independence, absolute, that, and the more holistic sort of view, more using complex of the whole brain. There's contradiction. So although it's not aiming to reduce these negative emotion or destructive emotion, but the very way of looking different. Therefore, the more complex sort of the mental mental state is developed. Then this single point, it's
more like kind of targeted.
That automatically reduced.
It would be interesting to look at the brain when you're in these different states to see whether they do.
So another distinction that needs to be explored and studied at the brain level is between two primarily different states of mind. One is more affectively oriented, which takes the form of, for example, like an aspiration, yearning, and so on. Then there is the other, which is more cognitively oriented, which may involve more of use of an intelligence, reasoning. And so at the brain level, it would be interesting to see how they're expressed differently.
Liz would probably be able to say more on that.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, we will talk about this some tomorrow, but I think it's actually a very complex interaction. So it's not the case that there's sort of one emotional brain and one cognitive brain. They actually interact at almost every level of analyses. It is the case that sometimes our choices are driven more by our affect and other times more by our reason. And we can certainly have control over that. So we can use executive functions to diminish our emotional responses and come with a different solution to a problem. But it's not so discrete as to say that there's one way of one thing driving a choice, which is emotion, or another thing, which is a reason. Because of course, one of the primary functions of emotion is to help give something value, to let you know the right choice to make. So that's actually an important part of your reasoning process to consider that as well.
아다 레벨 강에 야 남이 세부